You have an option to buy a practice with patients. I mean, some dentists, what I've seen they do is they buy a practice where the dentist takes their patients and opens up a new office, but they buy the office and the equipment. And some of them just create a brand new sort of startup practice. Now, from your perspective, what are the pros and cons to sort of each approach? Because I think I've seen a lot of dentists pick one of those options without really understanding what they're getting themselves into. I think there's advantages and disadvantages for each situation, but I think it's important to talk about, what are they for each of those scenarios?
The number one success factor in every dental practice in the country is patience. You've got to either have patients or be able to attract them in large numbers if you want to succeed with a dental practice. And the defining issue in the industry is there are too many dentists and not enough patients to go around. So certainly buying an existing practice with a large, robust patient base is always going to be a much lower risk process or approach than starting a new practice up. If you're going to start a new practice up, you need to be highly confident in your ability to attract large numbers of patients. Dentistry is not, as you were saying, it's not like running a restaurant. No one has ever looked at their spouse and said, "Gee, honey, a new dentist opened up around the corner. Let's go try them out."
Absolutely.
Never been said.
Yeah.
And so the other mistake I see young purchasers or young dentists make all the time is being overly worried about the physical assets in the practice and not paying enough attention to the patient base. I tell people all the time that if you buy a practice with beautiful new equipment, wonderful leasehold improvements, or you can buy a practice with a lot of patients and old equipment. The practice with a lot of patients and old equipment and maybe a bit run down, you're going to be busy from day one and making enough money to change the assets. You focus on the assets and not the patient base. Or if you set up, after you've treated your cousin and your mother, you'll be sitting there twiddling your thumbs, worried about when the bank's calling. So it's all about patience.
Yeah, I definitely agree with that. I've seen a lot of startup practices where, they spend a lot of money on building a beautiful office, and then they think that if they, flip the open sign that there's going to be a lineup of people out there the next day. But what ends up happening is, even though the cost to acquire a patient, if you're going to go down the marketing route, is probably going to be a lot lower than if you had to pay for the patient base, there aren't a million people just looking for a dentist every day. So yes, you will acquire those patients at a lower cost compared to just buying all the patients outright, but it might take you 2, 3, 4 years before you really get up to the level of just buying a practice with maybe 1,500 or 2,000 patients. And from a marketing perspective, it's a lot easier to take an existing practice that has a flow, there's patients there, and do marketing with their existing patients, because sometimes the dentist who is retiring, they might have had undiagnosed treatment for a number of patients. There might have been cases where they weren't comfortable to do the implants or the Invisalign. It wasn't their cup of tea. So you're right. You will be busy from day one. Whereas if you start it up, you got to have the cash reserves to sort of like withstand and be able to sustain your lifestyle for those 2-3 years until the practice can, kind of start paying you a really good salary.
Yeah, and the critical thing is you're doing the modeling for a startup is you need to model in a lot of money for marketing. And you need to be working with somebody who's got a proven ability to attract new patients to a practice. If only I knew somebody who could do that. And the only reason I'm on this video is because I've seen you do that again and again in practices. You'll recall that's how I found you when you did that for a client of ours. And so, to anybody watching this, I guess the other thing I would say, if you can build a practice from scratch and rapidly fill it with patients, economically, you're better off than buying a practice from me. But it's a unique skill set, and you need to have a really good business plan, a great location, and you need the backing of somebody who knows how to market to attract new patients in big numbers, because otherwise you're just going to be sitting there with empty chairs.
Yeah, I mean, we drive a lot of patients, but we tell everyone if you have a choice, buy a practice with existing patients. It is a much easier job for us to take a practice that has 1,000, 1,500 patients and ramp that up to 2,000, 2,500, than to start with a practice where nobody knows that person. It's a brand new business. It's a brand new logo, brand, domain. Google doesn't trust you. It is tough. I mean, there's no sort of like magic marketing pill. Like we can't just come in and sprinkle some marketing dust on that startup and just make it successful overnight. It usually takes quite a bit of time.
Well, and as you said earlier, if you're starting with a patient base of 1,000 patients or 2,000 patients, the number one source of new patients for most practices is referrals from satisfied existing patients.
Absolutely.
That's also the
Absolutely.
lowest cost new patient. So if you're going to get referrals from 5% of your patient base and you're starting with 2,000 patients, there's 100 new patients a year right out of the gate. If you're starting
Yeah.
with 0 patients, that's 0 referrals right out of the gate. So it's very synergistic in terms of starting with a good sized patient base, then layering an effective marketing plan on top of that. That's how we see people, who buy a practice, maybe an older, tired practice with 1,000 patients. New dentist arrives, impresses the patient bases, starts to drive referrals from the patient base, and then brings in somebody like yourself to get an effective marketing plan in place. Before they know it, they've doubled the patient base in 3 or 4 years.